Welcome into Courtside Seats with Kroeger, a Charlotte Hornets podcast. Here he is, Chris Kroeger.
Episode 33 of Courtside Seats, our Charlotte Hornets podcast, and we're going to go a little international with the podcast this week, as we're going to be joined by not only ESPN broadcaster, former Knicks and Rockets head coach Jeff Van Gundy, but also the head coach for the USA men's basketball qualifying team for FIBA America's Cup back 2 summers ago, and for FIBA World Cup action, which is going to come up in a few months. It'll be late in the summer and August. Greg Popovich, the head coach for USA Basketball, now taking over for Coach K. But USA Basketball, Sean Ford and Coach Pop, they needed a guy to stand in there during the NBA window and coach the team for qualifying, get them into the World Cup, and who else to do it but Jeff Van Gundy. So we took some time, and it's great to catch up with the head coach. Coach, how you doing?
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, I would love to know. So when you took over this gig, it was about 2 years ago, as you coached for the FIBA America's Cup and then qualifying for the World Cup team, and then Coach Pop's going to take over back again come August. But what was that like to get back in the saddle full-time and coach NBA players and G League players and know that you were doing it for the red, white, and blue? That had to be a lot of fun and probably a lot of stress over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot. I never really... during my time in the NBA, the G League was used much differently than it is now, and it was a much different league. And so to work with those players and to see some of them get their opportunities, however briefly, to play in the NBA and to improve their careers has been a real thrill, because there's a lot of great players out there that fans have little knowledge of, and they're hardworking, they're talented, and that's been the best part of the job, other than obviously, qualifying so that our varsity team, can play in the World Cup and then on to the Olympics.
When you knew how hard these guys work, you're aware of the grind of what used to be the D League and now the G League, but did it surpass your expectations once you got to be hands-on with these guys and just see how talented they were and the way they work at their craft and what that whole opportunity meant for them? Did it even surpass your expectations?
Well, in some ways it did. Now, I think the biggest thing that I think people need to realize is there's, 400-odd players in the NBA,
yep,
all compensated at different levels, but all compensated extremely well. Whereas the G League players are compensated better than they used to be, but still very, very poorly. Like, they make $35,000 a year. And so the difference between economically for these young people is so different than it is for, the NBA guy. And these guys are capable of being on rosters. I haven't had one guy that isn't capable of being on an NBA roster. And so the frustration can be enormous, and to see their persistence and their grit to continue fighting through some economic hardship, and also the frustration of knowing in many cases they're as good as some of the guys on rosters in the league is something that has really been impressive, that they keep going under some really difficult circumstances.
What is it you think that, and I'm sure it's not one specific answer, I'm sure it's a lot of things, Coach, but what do you think are the reasons why certain guys just haven't been able to make that jump over? And a lot of it's opportunity, right? Maybe the opportunity hasn't been given to them yet, but why is it, like you would say, that there are guys who are deserving and can play in the NBA yet aren't there yet? What leads to that? I think it's that. It's just, opportunity, the ability to catch someone's eye, or, to be drafted in the second round and get a chance versus being drafted in the, not or undrafted and maybe not getting that same opportunity. It could be as simple as being on a summer league roster where there's an actual open roster spot for the team that you participated in summer league with. There's so much that goes into it, but rest assured, there's guys, and you could probably attest to this, that are on the Charlotte roster, the Hornets roster, that
if given more opportunity, could play impactful minutes in the NBA, and vice versa. Some guys may, you could take some guys off the swarm and bring them up, and they could play well for the NBA team. It's just those last roster spots on each team. It's all eye of the beholder by the coach and by the team.
Well, you got to see one of them in camp, and then he played a couple games for the qualifying team late in the summer as well. Dwayne Bacon, what did you think of Dwayne when you got to be around him, Coach?
Dwayne has athletic talent that is NBA-like. Strong, quick jumps. I think he's got to try to figure out how he can use that athleticism to achieve consistency at the NBA level. And it starts with an every night intensity and willingness to do those things that take advantage of that athleticism. Sprint the floor versus trot the floor. Be a rebounder in traffic. Be a great cutter. He has all these types of skills athletically that he can be an every night contributor. Now, he's obviously, as you guys all know, he's not in their rotation every night. Yep. But that doesn't mean that opportunity won't come at some point this year, and I think he's got to be ready to use that athleticism that he possesses to achieve some consistency.
All right, take me back like 18 months. So July of 2017, when you get announced as the coach for the qualifying for FIBA America's Cup, and then for the FIBA World Cup coming up over the next 2 years in that period, in that window. How long was that in the works? When did that come to your table? When did you start to get word of, hey, we are interested in you, we think you'd be great for this job, and how much convincing did it take?
It was obviously when Greg Popovich and Sean Ford proposed it to me. I was totally unaware of FIBA basketball. Mm-hmm. So I started in June of, 2 summers ago, getting ready for that FIBA's America Cup. And the first thing I noticed was how little I knew about FIBA basketball. Secondarily, how hard it was going to be to put together a roster that could compete against these grown men of FIBA, and just how different the FIBA game was from the NBA game. Much more 90s NBA physical contact and style of play. And so it's been an absolute honor to coach for USA Basketball, but also to see how many good players there are around the globe and how great the coaching is in so many countries. It's really been fun to see that.
When you go back and you look to your time in the NBA, when you were coaching with the Knicks and the Rockets, and you had the pleasure of coaching the international superstar that really set off a generation of players in Yao. But looking back then, what was your, I guess, perception of international basketball, and now coming back on the other end, how's that changed?
Well, I always knew at the top end, the guys who were in the NBA, I knew there was really good players, obviously. Yeah. They just didn't have the depth of talent that, the U.S. has. But even getting by the layer of great players that we've come to know internationally, there's a lot of really fine players around, the world. And so when you get ready to compete against these guys, and particularly, you're talking about, grown men in their primes, 29 to 33, right, that are just outstanding players in international basketball over in Europe, in China. And they know the game, they know the different rules. It just becomes a lot harder to develop a chemistry and a knowledge that can win. And so, it's humbling to know how many good players there are, how many good coaches there are around the world.
How much fun was it to step into those other gyms and other parts of the world, too, and see the way they love basketball over there?
Well, that's been, there is true home court advantage in these international games. The intensity that FIBA national teams bring to the court is playoff-like intensity. But then when you take these FIBA national teams and you play them against the U.S., it's at a different level. Even with our guys that very few people around the world would recognize their names, like on our teams.
Yep.
the intensity is off the chart. And so it's been great. And we just played, our last game was in Uruguay, and they had in Montevideo, they have a new arena, 12,000-seat arena that was sold out. And it was just an electric atmosphere. We played in Mexico City, incredible atmosphere. Same within Argentina. So, and you think about it from the G League player standpoint. Most of them went to major college programs that obviously generated a lot of enthusiasm and crowd size. But when you play in the G League, it's very different. No one really knows who wins or loses as far as fans. Crowd sizes are very minimal. So this brought them back to where these games are of utmost importance, and they're playing in true road games against passionate fan bases. So I think the players have really enjoyed that as well.
Yeah, how cool is that from a coaching standpoint to see guys, not that they had egos or anything like that, I don't mean that in this way, but that they were humbled in a way to see how big the game is and you're such a small piece of it, right? Because that's what that is. You recognize I'm a small part of just such a giant basketball world that you had no idea existed. Like, that had to be incredibly humbling for a lot of those guys.
It is. And when you say ego, like, you can't play well if you don't have ego.
Right.
If you don't, you won't be driven. You won't improve. So you need a level of confidence that at times borders on arrogance, particularly if you're the G League player, because you've been told no so many times throughout your professional career that to retain belief in yourself, you have to have an incredible amount of confidence. That being said, when you go on the road and play in these games and see how many good players there are, how many good coaches there are, it is humbling. You are just a number. And so when you can put yourself into something that's bigger than yourself, like playing for the USAB national team, even though you won't be a participant in the World Cup or in the Olympics, you can take great pride that you wore the jersey. Without you, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and all those guys don't have a chance to play in the World Cup or the Olympics. So they can take great pride in that. They overcame a lot. They worked hard. And we've had a couple guys in particular that have dedicated a great amount of time and energy into this pursuit, and we'll be forever grateful.
So it was intentional, correct? The idea of bringing G League players to qualify, and you keep calling it the JV team, and you don't mean that in a disrespectful way. It's actually probably a pretty good way of talking about the qualifying team versus the varsity team, which will be the high end NBA players that'll play later on next summer. But that was intentional, correct? The idea of using G League players to grow the program and qualify for these championships, correct?
Well, it was intentional because the NBA season did not stop for the qualification windows. And so the G League, thankfully, was very cooperative in trying to help us get a representative roster. And this roster changed. We're coming up on our 6th different window of 2 games each. So there was a 12-game qualification process. And in that, we'll have probably over, 50 different players play in any, window. So we had very little consistency of roster from window to window, but the G League provided us this pool of depth that we could try to put together a representative roster. We're fortunate to be qualified. We won a number of close games, very few blowouts, all street fights. This America region that we're in, they play very, very physical, tough, strong players. So, we've been very fortunate that the G League was such a great pool of talent for us to pick from.
Well, from a coaching standpoint, you're a competitor just like the players, so how much, I'm sure that was stressful, but the idea of using that many different players, no continuity on your roster, how challenging yet fun was that to try to coach up a team and get them qualified that way?
Obviously, it was a huge challenge, but, I've been blessed with great coaches to work with. Right now on our staff is John Thompson III, the former Georgetown coach, who took them to a Final Four. Mark Fox, the former Georgia coach, who did such a great job at Nevada, Reno, and then at Georgia. And Othella Harrington, who was an assistant for John Thompson III at Georgetown, but played for me with the Knicks, so I knew. So we have, we've been able to put together a staff that works exceptionally hard at it, and to coach up these different players. And like you said, because there's no consistency and there's very little practice time, we get like 5 or 6 practices and 1 exhibition game before we play these meaningful games. It's been challenging. It's been fun. Ultimately, what it's been is rewarding to work with so many fine athletes and coaches.
What's the thing you didn't realize you missed about coaching after a decade, and now you got back into it and you realized, oh man, that was that's a fun part of the job, but you took it for granted for all those years? What was one of those things?
Well, I don't ever think I took it for granted, but what it reminds you of is there's no better 5 minutes in life than the 5 minutes in a locker room right after a great road win. The sense of accomplishment, of brotherhood, camaraderie, all that, it cannot be matched anywhere in life.
You know what's funny is, so I told you this is my first year doing radio, and so I get to be around the team. I'm traveling with the team. I recognize I'm a very small part of the team, but you build camaraderie, right? And so we went to San Antonio a few weeks ago. Tony's return, JB's return, and we won. It was a good win. We hadn't won in San Antonio since 2006, and we won a complete game. They played well. We played better. It was a great feeling. And I told Coach the next day, I said, Coach, that feeling was euphoric. Like, I wanted to bottle that feeling. I never wanted it to leave. And I said, I can't imagine what that's like as a player or coach, knowing that you guys actually really put in the work. I'm just a broadcaster. And he said, no, you're right. It's intoxicating. It's addicting. And that's what winning does to you. And you never want that feeling to go away. And the great teams and the great players and the great coaches, they chase that high all the time because it is such an addicting feeling.
Yeah, again, when you win on the road, and you just mentioned that was a heck of a win for the Hornets, obviously, to beat a San Antonio team that's playing exceptionally well. But it's that road win where it's just your group and you're in that locker room knowing, particularly like you just mentioned, against a quality team, an organization that stands for excellence. And when you are able to win and overcome some adversity throughout the game, it's a feeling that, unfortunately, it's fleeting. By the time you hit the plane, you're on to the next game as a coach. But, man, those locker room moments after great road wins, that is special. And if you don't enjoy that, then you probably shouldn't be in the business, because there's so many other frustrating moments in coaching that if you don't take time to enjoy those pockets of great efforts and great wins, man, it would be miserable.
You're talking about style of play. We can discuss this a little bit as it relates to the NBA especially, but did it make you miss, did it harken you back to an era when you were coaching, especially with the Knicks in the 90s and early 2000s with Houston, where you thought, man, that's what NBA basketball used to be? Did it make you miss that?
I think the NBA right now, style of play-wise, I think so many of their rules have helped. Mm-hmm. I think there should be a little bit more balance between rules as far as ones that benefit the offense, which is every rule right now, and the defense. I think a little bit more contact would be better, but I think for overall the NBA has done a good job evolving their rules and interpretations to allow the great talents that we have in the NBA to shine. In FIBA basketball, if you look at Steph Curry's FIBA experience, it probably hasn't been as positive as his NBA experience, mm-hmm. because it's much more physical. Freedom of movement, they've never heard those terms in FIBA basketball. If you go in the lane, you have the freedom to get your teeth knocked out.
Yeah.
That's how different it is. And so it's hard to adjust for even our G League players, the level of contact that is allowed, because they're playing in an era where it's like flag football, would be to an NFL player. They're playing where there's so little contact, and then they're thrust into a FIBA game, and it takes you back. I mean, that's what always amazed me about Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan scored at these historic rates and with this great efficiency with no benefits. He was allowed to be pounded, hand check, body check. The three-point line was in, but it wasn't used the same way, so there was much less room on the floor. And I think people they act like they know the greatness of Jordan, but if Jordan played if he played in his prime today, there's no doubt in my mind he would average between 35 and 45 and do it shooting 50%. He'd live at the free throw line. There would be absolutely no way to guard him now.
Well, and I guess that's the one thing that's interesting to me, too, is, you talk about what it's like, you call it like street fights playing in some of these FIBA games. I do think a lot of the international, you could speak to this because you coached against these teams, but some of these international teams, they're international players that are playing in their pro leagues in whatever country all around the world. There's a standardization of rules where most of these other pro leagues across the globe are playing under FIBA rules, where in the NBA you're not playing under those rules. So I know that's always an argument, too, of should there be even a standardization of rules where the NBA plays under FIBA guidelines where, for example, you could have offensive basket interference. You could tip the basketball in if it's over the cylinder in FIBA. Same thing, you could tip it out if it's over the cylinder in FIBA. That you can't do that in the NBA. But for like little things like that, do you see the benefit in standardizing rules across the board or no?
So many of the FIBA rules are better. I think the FIBA should go to much less contact like the NBA, but I do like the less timeouts in a FIBA game. I like the 40-minute game. The games are dead shorter. I like some of the rules as far as no timeouts in the flow of play. Knocking the ball out. Once it hits the rim, the ball is live. Leads to some very exciting plays. So I think the FIBA rules in many ways are better than the NBA. And I think the NBA should really think about going to no illegal defense. With the three-point shooting the way it is now, you're able to generate enough spacing. I think it would give some of our teams that have lesser talent the ability to be more competitive, and I think that would help NBA basketball. It's one of the things I like about FIBA. There's more variety in style of play from team to team than there is in the NBA. Basically, everybody in the NBA plays very similarly. High pick and roll 100 times in a game, 4 guys behind the three-point line, a roller to the rim. And at times it can become very monotonous. One of the things about 90s NBA basketball that I enjoyed was there were so many different styles. Indiana running Reggie Miller off baseline screens. Chicago running the triangle offense. There was some great post play, and there was some great pick and roll play. So to me, you had the run and gun Denver Nuggets who played motion offense. So I enjoyed the variation of styles. We don't have that as much today. And so I think the NBA could benefit by that, by instituting no illegal defenses. I think it would force players or people to play a little bit differently.
Coach, a couple of things, and then we'll let you go. I would love to get your thoughts on the G League as an entity. It's changed so much from what it was the developmental league, and then it became the D League, and now it's the G League. And soon we'll have these preferred, paths where theoretically a G League team, an NBA team could offer a contract, a pretty sizable contract in terms of money, but at the end of the day, it's, is a kid going to turn it down instead of going to a year of college basketball? We can have that debate. But just in general, the idea of the G League, what role do you think it plays now, and what role will it play in the future in terms of the health of the NBA moving forward?
Well, I think every team should have its own team, and the G League is, slowly and incrementally almost there.
Yep.
I think secondarily, what they have to do is they have to play with greater intensity and greater defensive accountability throughout the league. there are too many G League games, and I think it's maybe fatigue from, they don't travel on charter in the G League. The travel is rough in the G League. Everything's a connection, and it is hard. But I think from player one and coach one all the way through the league, there has to be more intensity to be as good a developmental league as it can be. And I think there has been incredible strides in the G League in the past 10 years, and I think there needs to be more strides made in the next 10 years. And it starts with paying these guys a more reasonable wage. I think you don't want to see American players feel they have to go overseas and play in different countries to be able to make enough money. I think that should be provided through the G League, and I think there's talent in the G League that represents a good investment by our NBA parent clubs and the G League rosters to be able to pay these guys a better wage. I think that's the next step into making this league all it can be.
Well, and I've noticed with our team, and I think we're getting this way, it's happened more so under Mitch and with JB now, where it's not uncommon. Dwayne's done it a lot this year. Devonte Graham, our second-round pick, 34th overall, 4-year player, as out of Kansas. I think he's a special talent that, 4-year college player, but, those guys get overlooked sometimes. And we've sent those guys up and down on assignment a handful of times already, and that used to be rare, and it used to be thought, I'm being demoted. No, you're not being demoted. You're not getting minutes right now in the rotation, so go stay fresh. Go play with our G League team, and then when you come back, you'll be ready to go. It won't be 3 weeks between the last time you saw game action, but that, I think, that's a good thing. We're seeing progress there where that's becoming more standardized and normal. It's not uncommon, just like a pitcher in baseball, to go on a rehab assignment to send a player down to the G League team to get some reps, and I think that's a good thing because that's progress, I think, with the G League.
Absolutely. I think, and that's why the G League team, their proximity to their parent club is so vital.
Right.
Greensboro to Charlotte is an easy, commute. You could even practice in Charlotte and be in Greensboro for a game. And I think, like you said about Devonte Graham, he's an NBA rotational player at some point.
Yep.
But to maximize his readiness and his talents to get minutes and big minutes in a G League game does nothing but help him. And I think, so the proximity, the minutes, and listen, these facilities, while they're small in Greensboro, we played there in a window earlier this year. It's a terrific arena, environment, a great work environment. So it's not like these players are sacrificing readiness by going down there, or they can't work at the same rate. No, these G League facilities, while smaller, are still very viable to improvement. And I think, like you said about Charlotte, with Graham and with Bacon, they've done a good job in utilizing their G League team to try to help these guys maximize their talents.
Well, it's our 30th anniversary this year, Coach, and so as a kid who grew up in Charlotte, I got a lot of great Hornets memories. One of the ones that wasn't good, though, is when we won, 54 games in 96, 97. Glen Rice was amazing, and then you guys swept us in the opening round. What do you remember about that series between the Hornets and Knicks? You remember that one?
Do I? They dominated us. The Hornets dominated us. That was the year we made the Larry Johnson for Anthony Mason trade.
Yep.
And the Hornets absolutely dominated us in the regular season. We had no answer for Glen Rice. He had an amazing regular season. And so we were in, I think we were a 57-win team, so we had home court. We won 2 nail-biters at the Garden, and then played probably our best road game of the year to sweep them in Game 3 when Allen Houston was phenomenal, and Larry Johnson, in his return to Charlotte, made a game-clinching 3 in front of Charlotte's bench. But that was a heck of a Charlotte team with Divac, Mason, Rice. And remember, Muggsy Bogues in that series he had a hamstring tweak. He played, but he was hobbled. If he was healthy, it could have been a much different outcome.
Though I think it's so funny. Glenn was here a few weeks ago, Coach, and we were talking about those days and just how good those Hornets teams were. Those were the best Hornets teams, but they didn't advance far in the East because that East was so loaded. It's like as good as the Western Conference is now, 1 through 6 or 8, whatever you want to say. The East was every bit as good there, so it's always cyclical. But that time in the Eastern Conference was just crazy how deep the conference was.
It was. You think about it. The Knicks were great. Indiana, Miami, Philly was coming with, at that point, Charlotte was outstanding. So you're right. The East then was the West now. That's how good and deep it was.
All top 6 teams in the East won 54 games or more that year. Not too shabby, right? Not too bad.
No, not at all. Yeah. It was a bear in the Eastern Conference, and that's why so much of winning today or winning in general. As a player, I hate when the media dubs a guy a winner or a loser based on his team, because you can make the case that so much of winning in this league is who you play with and who you play against and what era you were born in. I mean, so don't tell me that team of Charlotte wouldn't be in the thick of the Eastern. If they played today in the Eastern Conference,
1 seed,
they would be a top. Yeah, they could be the top seed. They were that good.
Oh man, Coach, it's good to talk to you. Congratulations on getting back in the saddle and qualifying Team USA for the World Cup coming up this August. And it's always a pleasure to talk basketball with you. Thanks for dropping by.
No problem. Take care.
That's going to do it for us. Episode 33 of Courtside Seats, our Charlotte Hornets podcast. NBA on ESPN's Jeff Van Gundy, but more importantly, former Knicks, Rockets head coach and head coach for the qualifying team for USA Basketball. He got us into the World Cup, and that'll be in August, and so we'll see, as he likes to call it, the varsity team now step in after some of those JV guys, including Dwayne Bacon of our own Charlotte Hornets, went to qualify Team USA for the World Cup, and they got the job done. So congratulations to them back in early December for knocking off Uruguay and getting the team qualified. So it's great to talk to Coach. If you've missed any episode of our podcast, check it out. They've all been archived YouTube on our Charlotte Hornets YouTube channel. You can also check them out on Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, wherever podcasts are available, including Apple Podcasts. Just search Courtside Seats. You could search Charlotte Hornets. My name, Kroeger, Kroeger, and then make sure you subscribe, rate, and review, and you'll catch every single episode of our podcast, which comes out each and every week. We'll catch you guys back here again next week with another edition of Courtside Seats.